Everybody like and subscribe, praise the bell icon. Story number 1.
It was a quiet Tuesday night when a group of friends decided to visit Chuck E. Cheese for a nostalgic trip down memory lane. They had grown up in the 90s, and the bright lights, arcade games, and pizza had always been a comfort. They thought it would be fun to relive their childhood for a few hours. The place was nearly empty, with only a few scattered families and a couple of birthday parties taking place. The animatronic band was eerily silent, the lights flickering just a little too much, but they brushed it off as normal wear and tear. After some time, the friends started noticing odd things. The music from the arcade games seemed to skip every so often, and the animatronic characters, the ones that usually played the music and danced on stage, seemed to be stuck in weird, distorted poses. The eyes of Chuck E. Cheese himself stared directly at them, though he hadn't moved in hours. It gave off a strange vibe, as though the eyes were watching them. As they wandered into the back area to explore more, they came across a door they had never noticed before. It was slightly ajar, and a faint, musty smell wafted out. They pushed the door open, revealing a dimly lit hallway that didn't match the rest of the brightly colored interior of the restaurant. It was narrow, cold, and the walls seemed to pulse, as though they were breathing. The group hesitated, but curiosity got the best of them, and they ventured deeper into the hall. The further they went, the more the temperature seemed to drop. The sound of their footsteps echoed unnaturally, as though the hall extended far beyond the walls that enclosed it. Suddenly, they heard something, soft, scraping sounds, followed by a low hum, as though a broken machine was still running. One of the friends turned to leave, but the door slammed shut behind them with a force they hadn't expected. Panicked, they tried to open it, but it wouldn't budge. The scraping sound grew louder, closer, and they realized it was coming from a vent in the wall. Then a faint, distorted voice echoed through the hall, muffled and indecipherable. That's when they saw it, a figure, hunched over in the shadows at the far end of the hallway. At first it looked like a person, but as they stepped closer, they saw that it was far from human. Its skin was a pale, sickly color, almost translucent, and its limbs twisted unnaturally. The figure moved slowly, dragging itself toward them with an eerie, jerky motion. Terrified, they screamed for help, but no one outside seemed to hear. The animatronic band, still frozen in place in the main area, now looked like they were in different, more unsettling poses, their eyes still locked on them as if they were watching their every move. The creature stopped, and the low hum of machinery filled the space again. A flicker of light revealed the true horror. The animatronics' faces were no longer just plastic and mechanical. They had been altered, deformed, as though someone had been inside them, using them as a shell. The hum intensified, and the creature started moving again, faster now. One of the group tried to push against the door, but the lights went out. It was pitch black. And then, just as suddenly as it had started, everything went silent. The group was back in the brightly lit arcade, standing in front of the same door they had walked through just minutes ago, as if nothing had ever happened. They looked around, but no one else in the restaurant seemed to notice anything unusual. The animatronics were back in their usual positions, and the air felt warm and inviting again. They left quickly, never speaking of what they had seen. No one ever figured out what had happened that night. Some say that Chuck E. Cheese is haunted, that the animatronics are not just machines, but something far worse, something that waits in the shadows, watching and waiting for the right moment to reveal itself. Others believe there's an old secret hidden in the walls, a truth that Chuck E. Cheese himself would rather keep buried. But if you ever find yourself alone in a Chuck E. Cheese late at night, you might hear that scraping sound, and you might just find out for yourself.
Story number 2.
It was a dark and stormy night when a group of college students decided to celebrate the end of finals by heading to their local Chuck E. Cheese. It wasn't the ideal place for college students looking for a night of fun, but they figured the nostalgia would make up for it. The place was nearly deserted, save for a family in the corner and a couple of staff members cleaning up. As they played the games, something felt off. The lights flickered more than they should have, and the air seemed unnaturally still. even though the place was supposed to be filled with the sounds of laughter and chimes from the arcade machines. The animatronic band, typically a harmless feature of the restaurant, stood eerily still on stage. For some reason, it looked like they were staring directly at the group. One of the students, curious, wandered behind the stage area to get a closer look at the animatronics. He felt a strange pull, as though something was guiding him there. When he stepped behind the curtain, he froze. The animatronic band was not the typical setup. It was incomplete. The parts were strewn around haphazardly, like someone had been working on them, but had left in a hurry. The eyes of the characters, once lifeless, now seemed to follow him. He quickly backed away, but the sense of being watched was overwhelming. As he rejoined his friends, they all began to notice the same oddities. The staff members had started acting strangely, moving too quickly, too mechanically, their expressions stiff, and their eyes distant. It was as though they weren't fully aware of their surroundings. After a few more minutes, the group decided to leave, but when they reached the exit, the door wouldn't open. They tried repeatedly, but it was locked. The emergency lights flickered and hummed, casting an unsettling glow over everything. They could hear faint sounds coming from behind the walls, like someone whispering their names. Panicking, they ran back to the arcade area, only to find that the once empty space was now filled with shadows. The machines, which had been playing their usual cheery tunes, now emitted a low, grinding noise, as if the motors were straining. The animatronic band on stage began to twitch, jerking in unnatural movements as if they were waking up after years of slumber. Suddenly, the Chuck E. Cheese mascot, who had been absent throughout the night, appeared. But something was terribly wrong with him. His fur was matted, his face was smeared with dark stains, and his smile was too wide, almost grotesque. His eyes were hollow, like deep black pits, and he began to walk toward them slowly, purposefully. In an instant, the lights cut out completely. The group was plunged into darkness, and the sounds of mechanical gears turning and soft, hot, distorted laughter filled the air. They could feel the presence of something in the room with them, moving closer and closer, but they couldn't see it. The air grew colder, and they could hear the soft scraping of claws against the floor. One of the students screamed as something cold and damp brushed against their face. They reached out in terror, but found nothing. The entire building felt alive, as if it were watching them, waiting for them to make a mistake. Then, just as suddenly as it had started, everything went quiet. The lights came back on, and the door opened. The group stumbled out into the night, gasping for air, but when they looked back, Chuck E. Cheese was still there, standing by the window, watching them as they left. The next day, they went back to the restaurant, hoping it had all been some sort of nightmare. But when they arrived, it was closed, completely abandoned. The windows were boarded up, the lights were out, and there was no sign of life inside. The building was old, and rumors had circulated for years that the location was haunted, but they never thought it was true. Some say that the Chuck E. Cheese mascot is more than just a costume, that it's an entity that feeds on fear. They say it's been there for decades, waiting for the right people to wander in and let their guard down. The whispers behind the walls still echo, and sometimes, if you listen closely, you can hear the soft scrape of claws, just waiting for the next group to wander in.
Story number 3.
It was a typical Saturday afternoon when the local group of friends decided to hit up the old Chuck E. Cheese near their neighborhood. It wasn't a place they typically visited as teenagers, but with a new round of terrifying rumors floating around about the place, they felt compelled to check it out. Some said the animatronics had started to malfunction more frequently. Others claimed they could hear strange noises coming from the back rooms late at night. Still, they figured it was just an overactive imagination. After all, it was just an arcade, right? They were wrong. When they walked in, the place felt off. The familiar neon lights buzzed too loudly, casting weird shadows on the walls. The arcade games made their usual beeping and blooping sounds, but there was an eerie tension in the air. Chuck E. Cheese himself, standing at the entrance with his giant head and oversized grin, looked as though he was grinning a little too wide, his eyes too bright, unnaturally bright. But they shrugged it off and made their way to the back, where the animatronic band was performing their usual routine. Something about it felt wrong, though. The animatronics were supposed to be moving in sync, their movements fluid and playful. Instead, they jerked and twitched, their faces frozen in grotesque, distorted smiles. And the eyes, they weren't blinking, not even once. The group decided to leave the main arcade and explore the other areas of the restaurant. They wandered toward a narrow hallway near the back that they hadn't noticed before. At first, they thought it was a maintenance area or perhaps storage, but when they pushed open the door, they found themselves in a small, dark room with only a few dim lights hanging from the ceiling. The air was stale, like it hadn't been disturbed in years. A sudden, chilling sound broke the silence, a low, mechanical hum. One of the friends, Matt, stepped forward to investigate, but the rest of the group held back. Then they heard it, a voice, distorted and garbled, echoing from the corner of the room. "Help me!" The group froze. They assumed it was just the malfunctioning speakers or another broken machine, but when they looked closer, they saw a shape in the corner of the room, partially obscured by shadows. It was a figure, a human figure, hunched over and motionless. Their stomachs dropped. Slowly, one of the friends, Sarah, took a cautious step forward. "Who's there?" she asked, but the voice didn't respond. Instead, the figure shifted, moving in a way that felt wrong, like it was more of a puppet being jerked around by strings. Then suddenly, the lights flickered and the door slammed shut behind them. Panic set in. They tried to open it, but it was locked. The voice, now much louder and clearer, spoke again, its words garbled and distorted. "Help me! I am stuck!" The figure twitched again, this time in a more erratic way. As they got closer, they could make out what it was. A half-human, half-animatronic creature. Its body a twisted, unnatural mix of flesh and metal. Its eyes, if you could call them eyes, were glowing red and tracking their every movement. One of the friends, Jake, screamed as the figure suddenly lurched forward, its mouth opening wide, revealing rows of sharp, metallic teeth. The sound it made was like a mix between a human scream and the grinding of gears, the kind of noise that made your skin crawl. They backed away quickly, but the creature moved faster now, dragging itself toward them. In a desperate panic, they tried to find another way out, but the walls seemed to close in on them. The arcade noises from outside were distorted now, warped, almost like a record player skipping, and the lights began flickering more violently, casting long, unnerving shadows. The animatronic band was no longer performing on stage. Instead, their twisted, lifeless forms were staring directly at them, eyes glowing in the dark. Finally, one of the friends, Anna, found a window near the back of the room. She tried to pry it open with trembling hands, but the glass wouldn't budge. In the meantime, the figure had gotten closer, its face now barely a foot away, the stench of metal and rot filling the air. With one final scream, Anna managed to break the window. The group scrambled out, not bothering to look back as they ran into the night. They could hear the voice behind them, calling out in the same garbled tone, "Help me." The next morning, the group returned, hoping that what they had experienced was some twisted figment of their imagination. But when they arrived, the place was shut down, completely boarded up, with a "closed for maintenance" sign hanging from the door. No one had heard any stories about the place being shut down. There were no warning signs, no explanations. They tried to report what happened to the authorities, but no one believed them. The place had been in business for decades. There were no recorded complaints about strange incidents or missing people. The rumors, however, continued. Some say the animatronics were created with more than just machines inside them. Some say the place was built over a forgotten part of the city, a place where old, sinister things had once happened. And there are whispers that the Chuck E. Cheese franchise holds on to more than just nostalgia. They hold on to secrets that no one should ever uncover. So if you ever find yourself in an old Chuck E. Cheese and you hear that strange, distorted voice calling for help from behind the walls, don't go looking for it. Trust me. You don't want to know what's waiting inside.
Story number 4.
It was an unusually cold evening when a group of friends, 4 of them, decided to check out the local Chuck E. Cheese, a place they hadn't visited in years. The store had been there for as long as they could remember, but recently there had been murmurs around town about strange happenings. People claimed they'd heard odd noises late at night, and some even said they'd seen shadowy figures moving behind the walls. As a joke, the friends thought it would be fun to investigate. They arrived around 10:30 p.m., just before closing time. The place was mostly empty except for a couple of families finishing up their meals, their laughter cutting through the stale air. The once joyful sounds of the arcade machines were muted, replaced by an eerie stillness that made the place feel lifeless. The lights above flickered occasionally, casting unsettling shadows that made the walls seem to breathe. Even the animatronic band on stage, usually a highlight, stood eerily still. "Guess it's just an old place," said one of the friends, Mike, trying to brush off the tension in the air. They all laughed nervously, not willing to admit they were already feeling uneasy. They wandered toward the back of the restaurant, where the arcade games had grown quieter, the screens flashing occasionally with their eerie beeps. As they passed the bathrooms, one of them, the door closest to the staff-only section, creaked open. A musty, damp smell wafted out, a smell that made their stomachs turn. Curiosity got the best of them. They decided to head into the staff-only area to see if they could find anything unusual. The hallway was dim, lit only by a flickering light overhead. Their footsteps echoed, far too loud for a place that should have been empty. At the end of the hall, they noticed a door slightly ajar. It wasn't locked, but it looked like it hadn't been opened in years. Inside, the room was pitch dark, save for a small sliver of light from a broken bulb hanging from the ceiling. Mike, trying to be brave, stepped in first. His flashlight flickered as he pointed it toward the far corner of the room. That's when they saw it. A figure was crouched there, almost entirely hidden by shadows. It was humanoid, but its body was distorted, as if it were warped out of shape. It moved, jerking slightly, its head turning in unnatural angles to follow them. Its eyes, black and hollow, were wide open, and it made no sound except for a faint, rasping breath. Before anyone could react, the figure stood and slowly advanced toward them. One of the friends, Rachel, screamed as they turned to run, but the door slammed shut behind them with a deafening bang, trapping them inside. They pounded on the door, trying to get it open, but it wouldn't budge. The lights began to flicker again, and the sound of the animatronic band on stage suddenly blared through the speakers, but it wasn't the usual cheerful music. Instead, it was warped and garbled, like a broken record being forced to play a haunting melody. The animatronics on stage now appeared to be moving, but not like they were meant to. Their heads turned slowly toward the hallway, their mouths opening and closing, making grotesque, mechanical sounds. The creature behind them had now moved closer, and the low, rasping breath grew louder. It was right behind them, its fingers scraping against the floor like claws. Finally, Mike broke down in a panic and kicked at the door with all his strength. It cracked open just enough for them to squeeze through. As they spilled back into the main area of the restaurant, they saw the animatronic band frozen again, just like before. The place was deathly quiet. They were gasping for air. But as they glanced back toward the hallway, they could see the silhouette of the creature in the dark, standing just out of view, watching them. The group didn't wait to investigate further. They rushed out of the door, and as they ran into the parking lot, they looked back. Through the window, they could just make out Chuck E. Cheese's form, standing motionless by the stage, staring directly at them. They didn't speak about it again. They never went back to Chuck E. Cheese, and when they asked locals about the place, they got only vague answers. Some claimed it was a fluke, that it had just been a malfunction or a trick of the mind. Others whispered about strange occurrences in the building, things no one would admit to publicly. But sometimes, if you pass that old Chuck E. Cheese late at night, you can still see the lights flicker. And if you listen closely, you might hear the faint rasping breath from the back of the building. You might even see Chuck E. Cheese himself, standing motionless, waiting.